Let's get into chapter 7 of the leadership space. And chapter 7 is really interesting and unique, and it's interesting and unique for a couple reasons. The first of which is that chapter 7 actually distinguishes the first definition of the leadership space from the second definition of the leadership space, which is all the way back at the beginning near the table of contents, right? So it's like, well, what are the two definitions? And like, why do we care about that? Well, the two definitions of the leadership space are: the leadership space is your inner space, which we've covered quite a bit now, chapters 1 through 6. Essentially, you have the power to create your inner environment. And your inner environment resonates out to your outer environment. That's like the principal concept of the first chapter. Then we spend a lot of time talking about how do you create your inner space. And so we talked about the 3 C's and all the different elements of how you use the 3 C's, becoming the observer, the interpretation filter, etc. And the point of that is that you take command of your inner space, the space between stimulus and response, your own mental and emotional environment. And that gives you personal power. That's cool. That's the first half of the book. Now we go to the second half, which begins with chapter 7. And what's that about? That is about what we call your interpersonal space, right? Or what's called interpersonal space, which is about the social space. It's not the space inside you. It's the space between you and other people. Okay? The space between you and other people, the social space. And this brings us to the concept or the principle of resonance, which is really the vibes that you produce in the world. And we feel these vibes all over the place, all the time. You walk into a certain club, a certain bar, a certain person's home, a certain situation, and there's a vibe to it. It's not even something I need to explain. However, at the same time, because I wanted to root these concepts in scientific principles, I'm going to share with you about the principle of resonance from a scientific level. And I'm going to share with you a concept that's very sort of not just unique to humans, but very connected to human beings, called limbic resonance, which is how our brains resonate energy and messaging to and from each other. And it's all part of our evolutionary heritage. It's something that's hardwired into us, how we connect with each other. That is the power of chapter 7, which is basically telling us how do we actually use our inner space to influence other people. That's what we're about to get into. Okay? How do we use our inner space to influence other people? So let me start with the principle of resonance. Okay? The principle of resonance. So let me tell you a quick story here. Scientists have, researched this concept for many, many years. And so one of the best ways for us to talk about how this works is the case of tuning forks. So if you were to take these, let's say 2 tuning forks, right? So let's just put one tuning fork here. It's like a kind of like a goalpost, I guess. You take this one tuning fork and you strike this tuning fork and it's resonating a certain frequency. Well, if you put another tuning fork next to it, okay, and you don't hit that tuning fork, this second tuning fork is going to pick up on the frequency that's emanating from the first one, even though you didn't hit it, because of the principle of resonance. Similar objects tend to resonate and affect each other. And I think the science even goes so far as to say, if you have a, let's say, 40 hertz or something tuning fork, then it will affect another tuning fork at 40 hertz, but it may not have the same impact on a tuning fork of a different level, right? So similar objects tend to resonate in the same way. And one object can influence another at a distance through this principle. Another example was the experiment with metronomes, right? These little sort of timing devices that musicians use that click, click, click back and forth, right? So the scientists put together a whole room full of metronomes and had them all going. They set them off and going. They're all going in chaotic motion, different ways, right? But after a period of time, the metronomes started to catch up to each other and synchronize until eventually the whole room was going click, 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 like a huge army of marching soldiers where their legs are perfectly together, right? So these metronomes basically resonated with each other in such a fashion that they tuned in and became one. So the concept is that there is a scientific principle that states that one being can influence another being at a distance. And I'm not saying that we can do telepathy, although I think some people, there's maybe going to be evidence at some point that there's something happening. There's quantum non-locality, where one electron or one quantum particle can have an instant effect on another. It's called spooky action at a distance, I think is what Einstein called it, okay? I don't need to go that far. Let's just keep it at home, right? And I want to talk about the way the human brain works. But the background concept is the idea that objects can influence each other through the principle of resonance. Now, the human brain has 3 levels to it, and this goes to this concept of limbic resonance. The human brain. Okay? So the human brain, let's say, here's you. I don't know if I can draw this very quickly. You're not looking too good, but all right, we'll make that me. I'm not looking too good. The human brain has an outer layer called the neocortex and an inner layer called the limbic system. Okay, and then a lower layer called the reptile, the R complex. Well, the other person has that same brain, right? So this other person is talking to me, and I'm sharing my thoughts, or maybe I'm sharing a glance or something. And what's happening for this other person is, because of a concept called limbic resonance, which is to say that the limbic brain of my limbic brain communicates emotions, resonance to your limbic brain, limbic resonance, okay? I'm able to communicate my thoughts and feelings, more so maybe my emotions, to you at a subconscious level. You pick it up. That's why we can feel people's moods. Remember, a leader's mood can have up to a 30% impact on team performance. Why? Because of this, because of limbic resonance, right? So if you're in tune with a friend or a partner and they walk into the house or they walk into, the place where you guys are hanging out, you can kind of sense what's going on. It happens all the time. Somebody sits down, they put their keys on the table or the desk or whatever, and they don't say anything, but you go, hey, what's wrong? They didn't say anything. You picked it up through resonance. Now, sure, can you pick it up through nonverbal communication like body language, facial expression, tone, motion? Sure. But there is a scientific concept called limbic resonance, which links human beings at an emotional level. As a matter of fact, Daniel Goleman in his research talked about something called the limbic loop, right? Or the limbic lock. And that is that human beings in families, in groups, in tribes, we tend to regulate each other's emotions because we share energetic resonance. And so this is a common understanding that women who spend a lot of time together, often their menstrual cycles will synchronize and they'll have them at the same times, right? Or people that are in close proximity, family, friends, lovers, they will tend to breathe in the same way. They will tend to have the same physiological signals. This is all scientific research. Why? It's because human beings have a limbic connection with each other, and we tend to lock into each other's emotions and psychology. This is why the leader's mood has such a powerful impact. This is why leaders create culture, because the leader sets the tone, not only of action and speech, but of energy and mood and emotion. So this is the thing to understand. Now, let me tell you a great story about this to kind of put it all together, right? So this is a true story. And it perfectly illustrates this. I had a student come to me years ago, and you may have heard this story before, as I've told it a bunch of times, because it's such a good one. But let me tell it again, just so that you have it, if you haven't heard it before. So one of my students came to me, this is many years ago, when I was first developing the chapters that became this book. And so we were talking about leadership and doing a couple of classes on it, and I was doing some coaching with them. And the student had come to me early on, and she said, Professor, I really appreciate you teaching me all this stuff because I've been struggling at work. I'm like, what do you mean? And she says, well, the truth is I kind of hate my work. I'm like, why? And she says, this is like 2019. She says, well, about 10 years ago, during the 2008, 9, 10 financial crisis, everybody at my at my company was fired except for me and like a couple other people. And the company kind of gave me all this extra work, and I was, dealing with all this extra work for years. And now they finally have given me a team. Things are opening up, but I'm having trouble like dealing with the team and being effective. Like I say to people all the time, like, hey, come see me. I have solutions for you. Come talk to me. I know a lot about the company and I can help you and stuff. And she said, leave my door open in my office, and no one ever comes in. Like never. They just walk right by. Nobody goes to lunch with me. Nobody wants to ask me anything. I don't understand it. And I said, okay, well, that's interesting. Why don't we take a look at that? And why don't you practice the understanding of your inner space? Become the observer. Look at your context, choice, context, contribution. Look at your filter. What's happening? And she says, okay. I'll tell you right now, she had an epiphany that's like mind-blowing. And so she comes back to me a couple weeks later. She says, Professor, you're not going to believe it. I'm like, what? She says, I think I solved it. Like, what do you mean? She says, well, people are starting to visit me. People are starting to talk to me. They're inviting me to lunch. And everything's changed. I said, well, what changed? She says, I think I changed my leadership space. I go, what do you mean? She says, well, I noticed something. I became the observer of my inner space. I looked at my filter and I realized that I had I was basically having a judgment and a story and a point of view based on resentment. That I felt like I resented the company for using my efforts for the last 10 years and overloading me with like 3 and 4 times the amount of work. And, I've been walking around the building just resentful. And I realized that even though I was saying with my words, come see me, and I left the door open physically with who I'm being, with my emotional energy, my resonance, what I was saying was, don't bother talking to me. I don't want to help. I don't even want to be here. And so while the door was physically open, it was emotionally closed. And that's the key. The key is that what were people on her team responding to? Were they responding to her words, come see me? Or were they responding to her resonance, don't bother me? Okay? What she was doing was saying, come see me. Who she was being is, don't see me. And people responded to who she was being. Why is that? Well, it's because, let me just put it up here. It's because to be who you're being, right? And in the book I talk about the honeybees, right? Like being. That, how bees, they'll kind of vibrate with each other and stuff, and then share information with each other, like where's the water, where are the sweet flowers. They actually communicate through vibration. So who you're being has a buzz to it. To be is to buzz. To be is to buzz, which means who you're being has a vibration. What do I mean a vibration? I mean a resonance, a vibration. So you are communicating to others with who you're being, and they are responding to it. That's what happened in the story. People were not responding to what the leader was doing, come see me, with words. They were responding to who she's being, don't bother me. And so the concept of chapter 7 is that when you become aware of your inner space, your leadership space, and you elevate your mindset and your emotional environment, your whole way of being, you will naturally elevate your team. You will naturally open up the space for communication. You will open up the space for connection. Why? Because we are hardwired to feel who other people are being. And when other people are being contribution, they're being a leader, people will naturally respond. And that's the key to chapter 7.